Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking with the Executive Director of 5 Talents, Dale Stanton-Hoyle. Thanks so much for being here, Dale.
Great to be here, Catherine. Thank you.
So I just learned about your organization not that long ago. A friend of mine said, come out and hear what is going on with 5 Talents, and I was, in fact, very impressed with the work that's being done around the world. Your organization is 20 years old. I confess I had never heard of it, but now that I know about you, I'm very impressed with what you're doing, and I hope to share with our viewers a little bit about how you got started 20 years ago, what does 5 Talents mean, and how did you happen to choose to join this organization 4 months ago as the Executive Director?
Well, thank you. First of all, 5 Talents is a micro-enterprise development organization. And what that means is that we help people all over the world start small businesses. And we work in some of the poorest countries in the world, places where many organizations either can't or choose not to work because they're so desperate. One of the definitions that the UN uses is what they call a fragile state. And so South Sudan, for example, is 3 years in a row now the most fragile state in the world. Another example is Burundi. And so those are 2 of the countries where we're doing much of our work with tens of thousands of people who are participating in our programs. You asked a minute ago, what does 5 Talents mean? Well, 20 years ago, and we are celebrating our anniversary this year, we were started by a combination of Anglican and Episcopal churches from Africa and from the United Kingdom and the United States, who all worked together to spawn this organization because there was such a need for working in countries, including those from Africa, who helped to start it. And it's based on a story in the Bible, in Matthew chapter 25, called the Parable of the Talents, in which a master gives some talents of great value to 3 different servants, and the one who was given the most was given 5 talents. So what did he do with them? He went out, invested them while the master was gone, and when he came back, he was able to give him back 10. And the whole point of the story is that we shouldn't be giving people something over and over again that creates cycles of dependency. Instead, we should be giving people the opportunity to take what they have, to grow it, to turn it into something 2 times or many times what they had to start out with, and that's what we really need, is to be moving people from dependency to dignity.
And that's what makes this model different from microloans. So a lot of people know Kiva. People even donate to Kiva microloans. But what you're talking about with this economic development, microeconomic development model is very different, because it really is about creating lending circles and a more robust economy where people are living.
You're exactly right. If you think of the term microfinance or microloan, what do you think of? You think of money. You think of a transaction, and the focus is on lending money. Well, that's not what the focus of our work is about. You heard me mention at the very beginning, it's about people around the world in desperately poor areas starting their own small businesses. So when we say micro-enterprise development, the focus is on the fact that people who didn't have the ability to have a livelihood before, they're able to start an incredibly small business and able to take care of themselves, and that enables them to take care of their families, and that has a ripple effect through their village or through their community, wherever they're living. So on the ground, it's a pretty simple process. The money that we give them is never part of the money that's lent. Instead, what we're paying for is trainers, and sometimes things like bicycles or cell phones that make those trainers able to do their jobs well. So we pay for the salaries of trainers who get together a group in a village or in an area outside of a city of roughly 20 people. And those 20 people save their own money. When they form their group, they form their own constitution. So this is not people from 5 Talents or from the United States or England or anywhere else telling them how they have to do this. Instead, these 20 people form their own constitution. They determine what are the interest rates going to be when people save their money. What are the lending criteria going to be for how long you are allowed to take out money before you have to pay it. So guess how much some of these poor people are allowed to save? You would think, oh, maybe hundreds or maybe $1,000. A person in South Sudan is really only often able to save about 50 cents to $1 per week. And yet, at the end of 6 months, after they've been able to save something like $50 to $100 of their own money, then they get together with their group of 20 people, and they kind of pitch to some members of the group a thing that's kind of like a Shark Tank pitch, in which they are showing their business plan. And their business plan has to hold water. It has to be something that their neighbors and friends are actually going to buy into. So when they pitch their business plan, maybe 3 or 4 of those 20 members will be able to take out a loan for something like $100 to $200. They start a small business, and their friends and neighbors have a vested interest in their success.
Yes, skin in the game, right?
Exactly.
So let's start with it. When you talk about a small business, can a business be as small as a cow, for instance?
Oh, it could even be smaller than a cow. As a matter of fact, some people with as little as about a $20 or a $30 loan will do something like buy a little tea service. We're talking about, little tin tea services and cups that they can then, on the side of the road, sell people hot tea. Or they might make a stew out of goat meat and rice and combine the stew with the rice and sell that in the market every week. So it can be an extremely small business. But speaking of a cow, let me tell you a little bit about Alice. Alice was a woman that I met when I was in Kenya a couple months ago, and she took out her first 5 talents loan in order to be able to get a cow. And with that cow, she sold the milk. She made enough money that she was able to pay off her loan and then take out a larger loan. By the time she took out the larger loan, she had enough money to build a room onto her house. Now, Alice and her husband had 3 boys, and all 5 of them were sleeping in the same room until she was able to build this extra room onto her house. And now she has a bedroom for her boys, and I can imagine that all your viewers can imagine what it would be like if you were all 5 sleeping in the same room.
Right, and that's the thing about improving the quality of people's lives by creating opportunities for employment, like you're selling your stew or you're selling your milk. But now she hired somebody, or she bought materials to build the extra room. So the money that she's earning goes back into materials or labor for somebody else in the village. I mean, it's like any economy, it's just smaller.
That's exactly right. The average person in what we often refer to as the global south or developing countries, they tend to have large families. And I can imagine why that is. I was just back in the Democratic Republic of Congo a couple months ago, and I saw how my cook, who was with me there in the 80s, he was now an old man and didn't really have many people to take care of him because he only had 1 child. So in the developing world, most people have large families. That gives them kids to help take care of them in their old age because there's no social security system. And that means that when a person starts her own business, and 90% of the participants in our program are women. So this is all about the empowerment of women and giving a voice to people who have often never had that opportunity before. When she starts a business, she then first helps the 5 or 6 kids and her husband to be able to go to school, to get proper medical care. And then what happens? Sometimes the businesses even get large enough that they can hire someone else.
And that is true. That is something that Muhammad Yunus discovered when he started the Grameen Bank back in the 1970s, that the majority of the people they were lending to were women, because women were more reliable and they tended to invest in their children and in their villages. And it was never just about them, it was about how to improve the future for their children, but in turn for the village. A lot of the children who got educated or went on to be doctors, came back to the village. This is how you end up having a better quality of life. You educate your children and you hope that they will come back and reinvest in the village again. So yes, I'm all about empowering women. I think that women, because they take care of their children and families, their interest is very different. It's not just about making money, it's about improving the quality and also the survival rate for their children too. I mean, this is a problem in third world countries, is just the survival rate of these children.
Yes. And you might say to yourself, well, gee, what do the husbands think about this? I originally thought that there might be a fair amount of frustration that the men are saying, well, wait a minute, we're not crazy about the idea of our women now being the entrepreneurs, the breadwinners of the family in some cases. But in fact, a wonderful thing happened. A lot of the men who have been interviewed after women have succeeded in our programs and have started new businesses, They've said, gee, she used to sit around the house all day with our daughters and she used to just gather wood and gather water, but now I'm finding that as she's interacting with people in the village, she's actually learning a lot and she actually has a lot to say. Now I want to spend time with her. I want to spend time talking with my wife because I never realized how intelligent she was before.
Ta-da! That is the law of unintended consequences, right?
Yes.
And I think there is a ripple effect that goes beyond the one cow or the tea service or the stew business to say that once people have money to loan other people, that this is the organic genesis of building an economy from the bottom up.
Yeah, I think that there's all kinds of ways that it benefits a group, I mean, an area, a community. For example, most of the areas where we work are undergoing civil strife. So in both Burundi and South Sudan and elsewhere, there is some conflict going on, and a lot of the population there has been displaced because of military interactions and other significant conflict. So what happens is that so much of this is because the people don't have enough resources and they're fighting over land or they're fighting over very, very small resources. But when any type of economic empowerment program, such as the ones that we run with microenterprise, when they help the people to grow new businesses and the standard of living of the population increases, it ends up helping to foster peace. Because why should people be wanting to fight with one another or kill one another if they don't have to be taking someone else's assets if they already have enough assets themselves?
You know, that's an interesting angle that I had never considered before. That when economies or countries or places are doing well, when everyone has more, there's less reason to struggle and fight over the things that can't be shared. I mean, that is just a very unusual perspective. I had not considered that before at all. One of the things I do want to talk about is how you got involved with Five Talents. I want to talk about your background as an engineer. Mm-hmm. You do have a very fascinating story to tell about all of this. We're going to go to a break, and so when we come back from our break, I do want to talk with Dale Stanton-Hoyle more about how he got involved. And I think this is something that people can plug into as far as how we can help other people in other countries so that we are building stronger economies with less political and civil strife. So please join us after this break. We're going to be talking with Dale Stanton-Hoyle of Five Talents, and you can find them at fivetalents.org.
Strawberries? Okay.
Okay, so what would you bring to my company?
What do you need?
I need problem-solving skills.
I got through high school without a car, a phone, or a computer.
No college degree, though.
Not yet, but life's taught me a lot, and I'm ready for more.
Well, you're not the typical kind of candidate that I hire. But you are exactly what I'm looking for.
Your company could be missing out on the candidates it needs most. Learn how to find a great pool of untapped talent at gradsoflife.org.
They'll test you. Try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver, the one in control. Stand firm. Just wait. And move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. Tonight we're talking with Dale Stanton-Hoyle, the Executive Director of 5 Talents. Thank you for being here, Dale. And I would love for you to tell the story that I heard you tell not long ago about your experience as an engineer, because you are an engineer by training, and your first foray into working with local people and what you learned.
Sure. Well, in 1981, I graduated from Duke University and headed straight to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And after a few weeks in language school, I then hopped on the back of a pickup truck and bounced our way along to the hospital in the very center of the country in an area called the Kasai. So this is an area that's almost all dirt roads, and with the exception of a little strip to the airport, we're about 1,000 miles from the nearest paved road.
Wow.
So I was putting together a frame for my waterbed, and I took the plug from a 380 volt planer in the carpentry shop, and I started to plug it into the wall, and it shorted out. That 380 volt socket turned into a flamethrower that just torched my hand and turned it black. So at this point, I can't really use my dominant hand, but fortunately the carpenters there were able to finish things off on my bed. I went back, ate dinner, and started to go to bed. But there was a Belgian woman who was staying at our hospital because we were the only hospital that had reliable electricity and food and well-trained doctors, literally, again, for about 1,000 miles. So I was feeling a fair amount of responsibility that we needed to make sure that this woman was going to be able to deliver safely. Well, unfortunately, that night, in the middle of the night, all of a sudden, the generator won't start, and she went into labor. So what do? Of course, they come knocking on the door, and I'm the newly trained engineer. I'm the guy who's supposed to be able to understand how to do all these things. And they said, Dale, please come, start the generator. Well, in engineering school, they don't tell you how to start diesel generators. But of course, I went up there and I've got my voltometer and I've got my flashlight and all my tools, and I'm trying to figure out what to do, and I could not get the generator to start. So here I am, I can barely use my hand. I've got my brand new engineering degree, and this woman is about to give birth, and I'm feeling all the responsibility in the world on me. So I thought, okay, what else can we do? And they said, well, we'll bring out the battery-powered operating light. And I'm thinking, well, that doesn't sound good. So they pulled it out, wheeled it up next to the gurney, turned it on, nothing happens. So I go at it with my voltometer, and I start trying to figure out what can I do to make this thing work, and the battery's dead. And at that point, I felt so utterly worthless, and I just realized that I could not depend on my own strength. Fortunately, Tato Lushimba, who was the person who was responsible for things there on site before I arrived, he got the generator to start. The woman delivered, she was safe, the baby was safe, and that was just one of many, many lessons that I had at that point in my life, that I needed to not be depending on my education or my skills, but instead I needed to be working hand in hand with the Africans who had so many talents that I did not have, that I needed to work with them.
And that becomes a mindset. I mean, that's a life lesson where you start to look around and say, maybe I'm not the smartest person in the room, or maybe the kind of smart I am is not the kind of smart we need.
Yes, you're exactly right.
And I think that's been hard when relief organizations have gone into some of these countries, and they ride into town with whatever they've got, bags of rice or whatever, and they're like, we're here to help. But they're not necessarily listening for what the villagers or the people in a community believe that they need, or learning to take advantage of or empower people who know many things. That's why I love the coaching aspect of what 5 Talents is doing. You're basically empowering, cultivating, supporting people who already know a lot about where they live and what people want to purchase and the kind of businesses that they need to support their communities.
You're exactly right. And if you think about what the English word talent means, we normally think about it as meaning, our skills, our things that enable us to do things. Well, the people that we work with around the world, whether it's in Bolivia or Indonesia or in Africa, they all have talents. And sometimes they don't even realize it. There was a woman who was speaking with one of our trainers, and the trainer was saying to her, what kind of business could you start? What kinds of things do you have that you can utilize to start a new business? And she said, I don't know. I mean, I'm extremely poor. I barely have a couple dollars. I don't really know what I could do. So the person said, well, what about the river nearby? Your village is right next to a river. And she said, yes. And he said, well, what can you do with that river. And she began to brainstorm, and she said, well, I guess we could fish from it, we could sell the fish. And he said, yeah, keep going. And she said, well, I guess we could charge people that need to get across the river in a dugout canoe, and we could start a business where we take them back and forth across the river. And so through this conversation, she recognized that she had skills and talents and access to resources that she never even realized. And so that's why our money doesn't go to actually creating the funds for the loans. It goes to those trainers that help people to realize what God-given talents they already have.
Right, and that is empowering people and creating sustainability. Because at the end of the day, you don't want it all to collapse once you leave town, right? And so these people, I think one of the greatest things you're building in is the fact that they've got to learn to support each other. In other words, they're loaning their fellow community members money. If somebody's chickens die and they have to start all over again, how's that going to work? I mean, it's got to be the people who've loaned you the money, who care about your business, who understand that you've got to be supported to get back on your feet.
Well, you've just mentioned another important story. There was a gentleman named Philip, and he was the chairman of his local community bank, a 5 Talents community bank that was started about 4 or 5 years ago. So Philip became a poultry farmer, and he little by little built up until he owned 3,000 chickens. He was the most wealthy, the most important person in his community. The expression was that when they had meetings, if Philip stood up, everyone stood. If Philip sat down, everyone sat. So he had this tremendous respect within his community. But about a year ago, a bird virus came through and wiped out 100% of his poultry, and he was no longer able to sell any eggs. So when I met with him about 2 months ago, he was describing how they had been fumigating the hen house, they had been working to get things ready for restarting the business. He was about to go back to his 5 Talents community bank and take out a loan for 1/3 of the number of chickens and restart again. And so it just said to me that having a community like you just described that has everyone supporting one another, it gives them resilience. If there's a flood or a famine or a bird virus that comes through, these are extremely fragile economies that normally would not be able to rebound. But because they form these ways of supporting one another, a good lesson that we should do the same thing.
Absolutely.
Then they're able to rebound and make it through the tough times.
And that's one of the hard things. You know, we've had wildfires in California recently and mudslides and things, the floods in Houston. But people have insurance. Like, you know, you can rebuild your house, you can rebuild your business. You know, the state's going to come in and repair the roads and the dams. That's not what we have here. I mean, resilience really is people figuring out how to take what they have and redeploy it in some way to recover, especially when things are widespread, like famine or drought or fires or things like that. You know, do you target areas? Are you part of that when something hits not just somebody whose chickens die, but when an area is hit by some enormous catastrophe, you know, how do you respond?
Well, a good example of that is South Sudan. I mean, the poor South Sudanese, they have literally gone through generations of conflict with the folks in North Sudan. And so when they became a new country about 3 years ago, and they are still the world's newest brand new country, it was such a wonderful time of liberation. But unfortunately, some of the problems didn't go away. There are now warlords that have oppressed the people in South Sudan that are not that different from what was going on when they were part of one country, Sudan. So unfortunately, that means that tens of thousands of people have been displaced. And even some of them who have already been through 5 Talents savings groups in the northeastern part of the country, who learned the process, started new businesses, increased the resiliency and the wealth of their communities, they've now been displaced, tens of thousands of them, and had to move south and west and move into villages and camps on the outside of the capital of Juba. Well, what do you think happens to them? I mean, what can you possibly do when you're living in a
refugee existence, right?
Exactly. You're a refugee in a displaced persons camp, or sometimes you're even in an area that's more restricted called a United Nations camp. And in a situation like that, you know, what assets do you have? Well, it turns out that some of those who were part of 5 Talents savings groups, they reconvened inside the camps. This is without any additional input from Five Talents coordinators or facilitators. They decided that they could do tailoring services, or they could mend shoes, or they could provide babysitting services or things like that. They could do other kinds of things that they could charge for inside these camps. And so we applied to the United Nations for status where we could then help to get back in and work with them. They gave us permission to do so, and it's just been absolutely amazing to see the resiliency.
That is amazing, too, that the United Nations actually gave you permission to do that. I think it's a testament to the credibility you have globally, that you're recognized as a credible organization that can come in and actually do work that benefits the people. But it's also a testament to the resiliency that you taught people something that they carried with them. I mean, the benefit and value of education cannot be overstated. It's the one thing no one can ever, ever, ever take away from you. You might lose everything you own, but you cannot learn what you know. And this really, that story about reconvening in refugee camps really is a testament to the fact that what they know and what they learned, they can take anywhere they go.
You're pointing to a really, really good point when you mentioned education. Because again, if you think about microfinance, you just think about taking out a loan. Well, when you just take out a loan, do you have the skills, the resources, the education that you need to use it well? So in about half of all of our savings groups, during that 6-month period that I described where people are saving money before they take out their first loan, they start off with literacy training. They literally learn how to read and write. And then they go through numeracy training. They learn how to give change and not be cheated by someone in the market who might otherwise be trying to take advantage of them. And then they get business skills. They learn, how to sell the right number of products and what kind of markup so that they can make a profit without running out of money at the end of the day, or selling something for too low a price and losing money on every transaction.
And that's kind of interesting too, because some communities don't have currency. Like there are places in the world where the economies are so small that basically it's barter and exchange of goods. So we shouldn't be surprised that not only can people not read, but they don't have necessarily a grasp of numeracy if you've never had a living where currency was used.
Right. And similarly, because many of these groups are rural enough that they haven't learned to read and write, the curriculum helps them to learn by doing.
Well, when we come back, we are going to talk a little bit more with Dale Stanton-Hoyle about the amazing work that Five Talents is doing across the globe. It is fascinating, so please join us after this break.
Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty.
You'd think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read and may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council of America, and reading is fundamental.
Oh! Checking your fantasy league?
Nah, just my 401k statement.
Nice. Where'd you find the money for that?
I just been saving a little every month.
I can't seem to save anything.
Well, what about all this? What about the money you're spending?
What money? It's gone before I can get my hands on it.
I got a pizza for a Todd.
Hey, can somebody spot me?
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind.
It's 547.
Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org.
It takes less than 1 minute to find out if you may have prediabetes, and you can do it here. So what are you waiting for? just go to the site.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. We're talking tonight with Dale Stanton-Hoyle, who is the Executive Director of 5 Talents. Thank you so much for being with me, Dale. This has been a fascinating discussion because I am not often interviewing people who work on a global basis. And so work being done in Africa, a lot of people might be asking, first of all, why Africa? Aren't there lots of places in the world, including the United States, that need help? And the other question might be, doesn't it make sense to build schools? Aren't there people who are like, oh, we need hospitals and schools, and why not start there? What's kind of the reasoning behind the approach 5 Talents has taken?
Yeah, great question. Well, first of all, schools and hospitals and other organizations are very important, and I've actually helped to build a hydroelectric dam for a hospital, so I believe in those kinds of projects. But what I've seen is that in most of the places where I've had the opportunity to work and where many agencies have been working around the world, it's difficult for them to graduate from that level of support and become independent. And so in order for people in the Global South to truly have independence, in order for them to graduate into a relationship of dignity, then they need to be doing things on their own. We need to be providing them with the educational component that you were talking about earlier, but not just giving them things. And so I think in our world, and often in the developing world as well, we want to get packages. We want to get new cell phones, or we want to get gifts, or we want to get things that make us happy. But in the end, it's not things that make us happy. It's the ability to work. It's the ability to take care of ourselves. It's the ability to take care of our families that really makes us happy. And so, if we can get beyond this thought process of being focused on things, it makes all the difference. And so that's why I think that microenterprise development is, frankly, much more powerful than I ever realized. I've spent my whole life wanting to try to help people. I can remember once I was in Las Vegas, and there was a street man who came up to me and was asking me to give him money. And I said, well, I'm not going to give you any money, because I never know whether or not someone could use it in ways that are ultimately just going to hurt them more than help them. But I said, if you want some food, I'll get you some food. So he said, great. So I bought him a hot dog, I gave him a hot dog, and I felt like, okay, at least I've not wasted the money, at least it wasn't spent on alcohol or something like that. And but then in the end, I didn't really do anything to help him. To
improve his situation.
Exactly. I didn't give him any dignity. I didn't give him an opportunity to fulfill his own dignity that he already had. That man had talents, and I never found out what they were.
That is so true, and I think it's a universal truism, and I hear it a lot here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, that the answer to poverty is jobs. And I think that's true everywhere. But in this case, in rural, global, small communities, it's not jobs, it's enterprise. It's having your own business. But it still is the answer to poverty. How do you lift people out of poverty? You give them something to do. You're right. People need to have, that's what sustains us, is a feeling of having value to the world and doing meaningful work, and having that meaningful work feed our families. And, I think people really do care about the future of their children. And this is why it makes, people are going, well, build a school. Well, that's true, but you still have to have families that can support the children to go to school. I mean, it's not one or the other. It's kind of like, in what order do you do these things? And I think clearly investing in meaningful work is the better way to go.
Well, I'm not going to try to make a case that one is better than the other. I think both are important. And I think that we spend probably too much mental energy trying to figure out, should we do this or should we do that? Should we put money into programs in the United States, or should we put them into things that are international? Both are necessary.
That is true.
My wife and I invest in all kinds of things here in the United States, and I would encourage all of your listeners to do the same thing. But what if you had $100 and you could invest it in something? If you had a family here in the United States that was desperately poor, and they needed to become employed, they needed to be able to help the family rise up out of that poverty, what would that $100 do for them? It would not do very much. But if you invest $100 into the training of someone who joins a 5 Talents savings group, it pays for an entire year of their process of going through the literacy and the numeracy and the business training that we talked about earlier. $100 can transform that woman's life and then eventually her children and have that ripple effect into the rest of her community. So part of what excites me about this is it's the highest leverage thing that I've ever seen.
Well, you know, and you make a good point about it's not either or in that regard either. Do you do something in your own community, in your own state, or in your own country, or do you do something globally? You are a newly minted Rotarian in the Vienna Rotary Club. I'm an older veteran Rotarian out of the Centerville Chantilly Club, but that too is really the whole idea behind Rotary. It's service above self. We raise money and we give it away, both in our own communities and internationally. And Rotary has always done that. And so, to me, this is a wonderful thing that you've joined Rotary, because I think you would make an excellent Rotary speaker at clubs all over Northern Virginia. And I hope that either you reach out to them or they reach out to you, because in my club, yeah, we give scholarships to the alternative high school in Centerville, and we also fund a medical dental mission to Haiti every year. And so we are doing something for as many people as we can. And I don't think it's one or the other. But your point about how far money can go, especially in teaching, you know, it's the give a man a fish or teach him how to fish. I mean, that's something everybody can plug into. It's like we can go with U.S. aid to African countries, but if we're not teaching people to fish, when the fish is gone, what is left?
Yeah, and I think that you've touched on a couple things about the importance of folks collaborating. First of all, the Rotary Club of Vienna has been very gracious and generous about helping to fund 5 Talents for years now, and that's part of the reason why I'm excited about being a part of them now. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, of course, has been paying for some of the things that you and I have been discussing around the world with the eradication of illness. And there are a lot of organizations. We work, for example, with the Mothers Union, which is part of the Episcopal Church out of London, and also has branches through churches all over the developing world. We also work with World Concern and with other organizations. There are foundations who have been giving us money. There's no one silver bullet that can do any of these things. And so it's really important that we collaborate and work together, just like the Rotarians do all the time.
So let's talk a little bit about the infrastructure around 5 Talents UK, 5 Talents Kenya, 5 Talents USA. I mean, there is an infrastructure that's 20 years old. And how do you all work together, and how do you work separately?
Sure. Well, when 5 Talents started 20 years ago, it was started, as I said, with organizations from around the world, but it was headquartered here in the United States. Then about 10 years ago, we spun off the 5 Talents United Kingdom group, partly because of tax laws and the ability for people who were very generous with their donations in Europe to be able to give money. And so 5 Talents UK was incorporated there. It's really exciting to see that 2 years ago now, we've also started 5 Talents Kenya. And so each of these groups is all part of one organization. We are one 5 Talents. We share staff and money and programs and all different kinds of things in the places where we work around the world. But we are incorporated separately, mostly because of tax laws and the fact that people get tax deductions for their gifts.
Well, so you had some visitors at this event in McLean that I attended a month ago, I don't remember. Very impressive folks with a lot of really interesting stories to tell. Because every experience there's not a cookie cutter experience when you go into any community to coach and train and to help establish these lending groups. So, you know, how has bringing 5 Talents Kenya on board kind of made a difference in that specific country?
Well, Kenya is another one of the really great success stories. You met that night Bishop Gideon and Peterson, his protege, who is the chair of 5 Talents Kenya. Both of them are Kenyan. They are wise. I have already learned things from them. It's been wonderful getting a chance to get to know them. But the reason that it's a success story is because what started there roughly 10 years ago has now spread and become so productive. So many savings groups have been spun off. So many tens of thousands of Kenyans have now started their own businesses that they're actually incorporating and forming some connections to the Kenyan government as well, which means they've graduated. And graduation, by the way, is the term that we use for all of our groups. There are folks in Indonesia and in Burundi and elsewhere that once they've been through about 1 to 3 years of our program, then they graduate. And we're no longer paying for anything for them because they're independent. And that's a true measure of whether or not something is successful.
It is. Plus, you've given them the ability to turn around and teach other people. And that really is the whole point of this, too, is that, again, knowledge is the one thing people can't take away from you, but it's also the thing you have to give that doesn't have a cost except for your time, right? We can all teach somebody something else. The cost to us is our time to do it and our commitment to do it. So you are actually leaving behind this amazing gift, and it's the gift truly that keeps on giving.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So how do you decide where else to go? So there's a lot of places in this world that need help. So you've graduated Kenya, and you've graduated places in Indonesia, and now where do you go?
Well, I mentioned that this is our 20th anniversary. We're excited that we are expanding now. Things are really exciting, and we are going to be moving probably next month, in the month of February, into the Democratic Republic of Congo. So it's kind of a wonderful irony for me that I started there in 1981, and now here I am all of these years later with Five Talents having been invited there. I should say, we don't work in any country that we're not invited into.
That's important.
That's very, very important. After the earthquakes in Haiti, I saw so many organizations come rushing in, and it was a tremendous amount of inefficiency and all kinds of things like that going on because there just wasn't enough infrastructure there within the country. So every place that we have been working in the world, over 20 countries now over the last 20 years, and especially where we are right now, every single one of those areas has a local church component where they have pulled us in. And so when we go in and start forming these savings groups, we don't have to just go walking around the streets looking for people.
Knocking on doors, hello.
Yeah, exactly. There are people that are already part of local churches there, and we generally get the message out through a local bishop or a local pastor who basically says, hey, Five Talents has been able to bring in a facilitator to help form a new group. Would you be interested in joining?
You know, I think that's important too, what you've highlighted, that you do have to have infrastructure. And this network of your faith communities where people are already part of an existing community is a great way to figure out who the best candidates are to be part of this program. So, you know, my hats are off to the fact that you've been doing this so successfully for 20 years. When we come back from our break, we are going to be talking with Dale Stanton-Hoyle, the Executive Director of Five Talents, about the work they're doing globally. And we'll do a deeper dive into what we can expect next and how you can get involved. So please join us after the break.
For all the papas out there, let's stop what we're doing and take a moment to be with our kids. They can be loud moments, goofy moments, dorky moments. It doesn't really matter. Every time dads take a moment to be with their kids, it's pretty momentous. So let's all take a moment to make a moment today.
Hey, did you know that 2.4 million loving cats and dogs in shelters and rescues need our help to find a home? Go to theshelterpetproject.org and search your local shelters and rescues. Go for a cuddle with your next best friend. Adopt.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
We cannot be bystanders.
We can stop to make sure someone is okay.
We can warn someone when their drink isn't safe.
And disrupt the situation.
We can.
Get someone the cab.
Or walk them home safely.
We can make campuses safer for our friends.
Our roommates.
Our classmates. Our fellow human beings.
We cannot be bystanders.
We can. Intervene.
It's on us.
All of us.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
When it comes to saving money,
What?
don't act like a baby.
Oh, it's like they're having their own little meeting.
This is so humiliating. Be the boss. I'm the boss.
What the?
Power nap. You were saying.
And make a budget.
Let's get to work.
Need a little help?
Stacy, read back the notes.
I can't read. What's it say?
Create a personalized savings plan and get other tools and tips
We can share.
You obviously didn't go to business school.
at feedthepig.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. We are talking with Dale Stanton-Hoyle. He is the Executive Director of the global nonprofit 5 Talents. Thank you so much for being here. This has been fascinating.
Thank you.
So let's talk about global poverty. You know, overall global poverty has declined, and I personally think that because we are a global economy and all of us are inextricably tied to one another, that we need to care about raising people out of poverty. But why Africa? And why should we be throwing money at Africa when there are probably other countries? You know, some people think there are other countries that perhaps are more deserving of investment than Africa. So explain to us why you believe that Africa is deserving of this kind of investment.
Sure. Well, first of all, before I forget, let me just make sure everyone knows that we are also active in Asia and South America, but
Yes.
a lot of our work is going on in Africa. And a lot of folks feel like that, you know, it's just been having so many difficulties for so many years that it's, you know, it's not worthy of putting more money into, you know, invest somewhere else instead. Well, think for a minute about what's been going on, as you said, about how worldwide extreme poverty has been getting better. So first of all, right now, we are at somewhere around 10% worldwide for the total population of the world being in extreme poverty. Now, even though that means that there's still, you know, almost 1 billion people who are suffering, that's much, much better than it used to be. If you look at things like infant mortality rate, the number of mothers who die in childbirth, the number of kids who die by age 5, the number of little girls who eventually learn how to read, or things like that. If you go back 100 years, that number was more like 50%.
Right.
I mean, it's amazing to think that really the Western world that we're most familiar with was really kind of a relatively small part of what was going on worldwide. And so to go from 50% extreme poverty to 10% extreme poverty says, we should be excited about this. We should be pouring ourselves into something that's a success story. It's not too big a problem to solve. And so if you think more specifically about what's going on in Africa, I think about individual stories like the ones that we talked about a few minutes ago with Alice and her cow, and
Philip
with
and his
Philip
chickens.
and his chickens. And there are so many other stories like that. If people go to our website, 5talents.org, and just go to the section that talks about resources and pull up the videos. We have got dozens of fantastic videos, and when you see the smiles on the faces of the people who are participating in these programs, I don't think after you see those smiles and you realize how much those people have been able to do, you'll ever ask again, is it worth it? Because it is. These people are transforming their lives, and it's a great success story that we can all be a part of.
Well, that's, you know, and that is fantastic. And I think you're right. I think people need to understand the personal stories. It's not a statistic. I mean, 10% of extreme poverty is a number. Philip and Alice are people, and they have families, and they have children, and they have hopes and expectations and dreams for what their country and their communities and their children will have in the future. Tell us a little bit more about Asia, about South America, and kind of the future plans.
Sure. Well, we're very active right now in Myanmar and in Indonesia. Now, if you think about the fact that 5 Talents started off with these Christian churches, the Anglican and Episcopal churches as founders, and then you think about what's going on in Myanmar and Indonesia, neither one of those is a predominantly Christian country. And yet, these programs are thriving there. And Buddhists participate, Muslims participate, Christians participate. It really doesn't make any difference. We're completely agnostic about the religious beliefs of the people who participate in these programs. And so that's very important, that it's not a proselytizing effort, but it's an effort that's focused on the dignity and the economic empowerment, and especially the women's empowerment of the participants in the programs. So we are increasing our investments in all of those countries. We also have a program in Bolivia where we are looking to expand on the work there as well. And then we hope to start in a new country if we are invited and if we can work out all the details elsewhere in Asia. I can't tell the name of that yet, but I hope that we'll be able to share that with your viewers at some point. But the main thing is that because we have folks who are investing in 5 Talents, we are able to expand our programs. There are whole new geographical areas that we haven't even been able to move into yet. And even in areas where we are active, I'll give you an example of what one of our board members said a few days ago. She spent some time recently in Burundi, and she traveled to the end of the road in a 4-wheel drive and then kept going. And she said there was an area that didn't even have a dirt road, but we were basically going down a walking path with this 4-wheel drive until we finally bounced our way into this village. And I saw the faces on hundreds of people who wanted to be able to participate in our programs. And when we were discussing as a board what we could do to expand these programs, this woman said, there are tens of thousands of people right now who are waiting in line for new programs. All we need is for people to make enough donations that we can go out and hire the facilitators and start the programs, and we will be able to address those tens of thousands of people who have already invited us in and who are simply waiting.
You know, that is amazing. It reminds me, our brand new governor in his inaugural address talked about the power of hope, you know, and that hope is the thing that makes people believe that it can be better. And they become invested in being part of what is going to make it better. And that's exactly what I'm hearing when you say that. I'm also hearing too, and we've discussed it earlier, that women sort of are the empowering engine, that women have a different kind of interest in how to use the money. They are reliable. They look to the entire community as well as their children. Muhammad Yunus discovered in the 1970s that men were not necessarily good people in which to invest microloans. What has your experience been with finding the right kind of candidate for your programs?
Well, great question. Yes, there are plenty of men who are doing a great job, and as a matter of fact, some of the leaders of the programs who have a lot more education or ability to read are men. But for the most part, women are the ones who form the heart of these savings groups. They tend to make up about 90% of all the participants who start new businesses. In one group in Africa, there was a woman who was explaining to her husband that she was now getting close to the end of her 6 months and she was going to be able to take out a loan. And her husband said, great, I'd like to take out a loan and get some money to go out with my beer drinking buddies and have some fun. And she said, good luck. If you make that kind of business pitch to the group, they're not going to fund you.
Yeah.
You have to be able to provide a business plan that is really going to work, that our neighbors are willing to invest in.
Yeah, that's what Muhammad Yunus discovered too, is that the money dissipated generally through liquid consumption. And so generally the Grameen Bank, same thing, they lend to women. And so I think, and it does empower women, and I think girls should have the opportunity to learn to read and learn business and own businesses. And seeing their mothers be the driving force of their local village economy is very empowering.
There's an expression that's really important that describes what you just said. These women are given a voice. So for example, in South Sudan, there was a woman named Nadalina Ahok. And locally, she was referred to as Ahok Ahok. And Nadalina grew up as the 5th wife of a person in the military. Well, what that means is that basically after the man who's making the money has distributed his money to his first 4 wives, there's almost nothing left for her and the kids. So she was desperate when she joined a 5 Talent savings group, started a very small business where she was able to get a used refrigerator, sell cold water on the side of the road to the business people who were coming and going. She raised enough money to be able to send her kids to school, to be able to pay for medical care, and eventually to be able to open up a shop. Later, we formed a small community bank there in South Sudan, and she became the chair of the board.
Wow.
People noticed that when Nadalina spoke, she had great wisdom to speak. She gained her voice.
That is a great story. That really is. And it makes me very hopeful, too, that we should invest in expanding the programs so that everyone has the opportunity to thrive. And I do think that you're talking about countries that graduate the program. Is there going to be tracking at some point to go back and sort of keep your finger on the pulse of their success, you know, as time goes on without you, beyond their graduation from the program?
Yeah, that's a very important point, because part of what we do programmatically is we get reports from every single one of these groups every 6 months. So anyone who invests money in 5 Talents knows that the money is being used wisely, because we always are getting reports back from the field that show us how the money is being spent responsibly.
Yeah, and so you can just add to your catalog of great success stories. So, you know, as we move forward into areas, and you talked about establishing in refugee camps, you know, do you think that the economic health of these countries where you have this program will ultimately help to dial down the amount of political strife and civil war and some of the things that plague these countries?
I do, with a caveat. We are so small right now that we're not making nearly enough impact. So I guess this is where I would appeal to your listeners and say, if we were able to do more, if we were able to move into more geographical areas and to affect more people, then it could have a significant impact on the war or the peace within these areas. As we were discussing earlier, when people aren't hungry anymore, they're a lot less likely to be fighting with one another.
True, and same with land and resources. When people can make a living doing something that feeds their family, we don't need to fight over a watering hole or hunting rights or, you know, coal or mines or some of the natural resources that also are the backbone of some of these economies in developing countries. So I wish you every success. I think that going forward, it's going to be remarkable to see the direction in which you go. I'm anxious to hear what Asian country that you were negotiating with. And I do encourage people to look at how they can become part of the success of 5 Talents. A rising tide does lift all boats, and I do think that there are countries who would benefit from being taught how to fish, just to go back to our fish analogy. I can't thank you enough. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Please invite me to the next things. You are based here in Northern Virginia. You have offices here. You have events here. So people can go on your website, which is 5talents.org, and they can find information about upcoming events. Anything you want to talk about that you've got coming at the moment?
We have a match going on right now, which means that we have a very generous donor who is giving $1 for every dollar that other people contribute. And unlike some matches where it's going to get given either way, we need other people to contribute for us to be able to get what this donor is going to provide.
Well, that's very exciting. And after 4 months, I'm glad that you feel like you have made such an impact and had such great success, because this has been a great first 4 months for you. So thank you to everyone who's tuned in. This has been Inside Scoop with Dale Stanton-Hoyle, the Executive Director of 5 Talents, and you can find that at 5talents.org.